committee meeting this morning. First, we are going to hear from staff on the one topic we have in front of us, which is rezoning Z5320.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Travis Crane in Planning and Development, providing the staff presentation on this zoning case Z5320. So if I could get the ability to share my screen, I will show a short presentation and then take any questions that committee members may have. Bear with me 1 second. You should see my screen now. If you don't, please let me know because I can't see anyone else. So I mentioned this is a rezoning for Z5320. It's a collection of properties on Lead Mine Road, just south of Inman Park Drive and Sugar Bush, north of Fillcrest. The properties collectively are just over 5 acres in size and currently zoned residential 4. This is a request for RX4 parking limited conditional use. This was reviewed by the Planning Commission, where they recommended approval on a split vote, 4 votes in favor and 3 against. And the dissenting votes cited their disagreement with consistency with the comprehensive plan with this request. So before I dive into the actual subject matter, I want to reset the table here, if you will. This request was previously presented back to City Council at the beginning of the summer, and staff and the applicant were asked to have another meeting with the neighborhood or the interested parties who had been involved in this zoning case throughout the process. So that meeting occurred towards the end of June of this year, and there was a deadline for the applicant to submit revised conditions. That was on July 1st. And so past that point, changes to conditions are not permitted by the code. So essentially what you have from a condition standpoint is what should be decided upon today and ultimately by the City Council. There's no ability to alter those existing zoning conditions. So I'll give a brief recap of the zoning conditions. There are a handful of them, and I'll highlight the ones that have changed since you last saw this. So there are some conditions that would offer prohibition on certain uses or restriction on certain uses. There is a limitation on number of congregate care units of 185. There's a 150-foot principal building setback from the northern property line that's adjacent to those properties that front on Inman Park Drive. There's a requirement for a 32-foot wide tree buffer on the property. And the tree buffer is intended to have a certain number of trees and shrubs planted or preserved in either instance. There are additional conditions about trees that are within 50 feet of the eastern parcels, and those are the parcels that directly abut the eastern property line here. So there's a requirement for landscaping there. There's an additional condition related to stormwater runoff, and that a 25-year storm is required. Parking and pedestrian area lighting is going to be restricted through these conditions. So there's an attempt here to reduce any light glare or spillage with condition number 8. A condition that limits location of trash storage, collection, loading docks, and generators, and that's a distance of 200 feet from the northern property line. And then other trash collection and mechanical equipment must be designed in a similar state as the building. So starting with condition 11 here, this is new, condition that you have not seen previously. So this condition would require the dedication of a transit easement and installation of transit improvements in this area. So a 15 by 20 concrete pad, a cement landing zone between the back of curb and sidewalk, a transit shelter and bench, a trash receptacle, and connectivity with the sidewalk. The next new condition is a prohibition on making a sewer connection to Winsong Court. And so that would be a sewer connection through a different private property here. And this condition was reviewed and vetted by Solid Waste Services and Raleigh Water. So there is concurrence here from staff on this connection. The thinking being that we don't want to restrict any type of utility service to the property, and staff believes that there are adequate alternatives to utility service to this property without utilizing Windsong Court. And then finally, last new condition, applicant would offer up a letter of credit in the amount of $20,000 prior to any issuance of certificate of occupancy, and that would be held in the event that a traffic signal were to be installed at Lead Mine Road, and there's a period of 5 years where the letter of credit is renewed annually with a continual request for installation of a signal, provided that it meets warrants. And then that money would be used towards the installation of a signal. So as I mentioned, the Planning Commission recommended approval of this request 4-3. They found it consistent with the comprehensive plan and reasonable in the public interest, citing a number of land use policies in the comprehensive plan and an urban design policy as well. And that concludes my presentation. I will figure out how to stop sharing and then answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Travis. Does anybody have any questions for Travis? Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. Travis, I wonder if you could maybe put the presentation back up. The summary of the conditions in our agenda was a little more brief than what you had on the screen, and I'm focused on condition. I think it's number 11 about the transit easement. Just need to see that again. There were two time limitations on there that were confusing to me in that they might conflict with each other. I'm sorry, it's not that one. There it is, number 11. So help me understand how this works, because we've got prior to the issuance of a building permit and prior to the issuance of the first certificate of occupancy. So help me sort this out. Which
Certainly. So there are really two trigger points here, if you will. The first is dedication of an easement, and that would happen prior to any building permit being issued. So through the site review process, if this case were approved, staff would look at this condition and require the recordation of dedication of a 15 by 20 transit easement. So then that is put in place before building commences on the site. And then the second trigger point, or the second gate for the applicant to walk through, is the actual installation of the transit infrastructure, and that has to happen before the building can be occupied. So again, it's two different points of threshold here for the applicant to walk through, and this is fairly typical language that has been used in the past.
Okay, but let me follow up question then, if I may. So all of this, I mean, the way I'm reading this, all of this is at the discretion of the Department of Transportation, but transportation doesn't issue building permits or certificates of occupancy, unless I'm misunderstanding badly. So what exactly is the Department of Transportation applying their discretion to?
Yes, sir, and that's a good question. So the Department of Transportation is one of those matrix departments that is involved in site review. So while the Department of Planning and Development is the coordinating department for site review and building permit review and issuance, Department of Transportation, just like engineering services and stormwater and utilities and other departments, are involved in those reviews. So the planning and development staff would coordinate the Department of Transportation for the recordation of the dedication of the transit easement and recordation of the easement, and then installation of the facilities there. So it's just it's identifying the point of coordination between different departments in the city. Does that make sense?
I think I'm following you. Maybe I would have just wrote it differently, but the transportation doesn't issue building permits or certificates of occupancy, right?
Yeah, council member, this is Pat Young. Sorry to jump in here, but they do have the ability to, we would put a hold, if this condition is approved, we would put a hold in our intergov system, which is our review system, and ensure that the permit couldn't be issued until this review is completed by transportation. And I believe, I'll defer back to Travis here, but I believe that the idea of the discretion pertains to the transportation director making the determination that the precise location is appropriate for the service that will be provided, and that the service is indeed going to be provided in a timely fashion, right? So if at the time of building permit, there's indication that service will not be provided at this location, he can use his discretion to not require it. Very likely there would be transit required or available at this location at some point in the foreseeable future, and this easement would be accepted. So that's my best comment. I'll turn it back to you, Travis.
Yeah, and that's great context, Pat. I appreciate that. He said it better than I could have. The discretion here that's applied really pertains to the need for service. So if there were an instance where the city as a whole decided that transit service was not needed in this location for whatever reason, the Department of Transportation director would have that discretion.
Okay, that's very helpful. If I may continue, Mayor, I have one more question about the last condition about the traffic signal. So this is all well and good, but and I've personally been working on trying to get a stoplight here, and I know others have tried for a long time, and it's very much needed. So, I mean, I'm wondering if staff has any insights about just how likely that is to happen and when it might happen.
That's a really good question. I don't know that I specifically have any insight, and I'm not certain there's anyone on the call from transportation or has talked with transportation about that. As you're aware, the installation of a traffic signal is a technical procedure, meaning that the installation of a signal has to meet what are known as warrants, meaning there are certain circumstances or situation that is applied that would require the installation of a signal. It's not as easy as just having the city go out or the state go out to an intersection and install a signal. They look at things like speed, curvature of the road, accident history, those type of things. And if these different circumstances or warrants are met, then a signal can be installed. But you're right, there's a little bit more rigor to that process of installation here. And again, I'm not certain if Don Belk has any additional information here, or if he talked with Department of Transportation staff about the likelihood of a signal being installed here. I just certainly don't have that information.
So,
Travis, we do have Mr. Jason Myers from Transportation Planning. I believe he is available to address this specific issue. Jason?
Yes, this is Jason Myers, the Department of Transportation. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, thank you.
Can.
I am not certain I can speak to the certainty of a signal being built at that location, but it is certainly the best location or the highest probability of a signal being installed somewhere near there, and that maybe the key thing in this is the amount of the letter of credit and the amount of a projected cost of installing that signal. And I'd like to remind, I guess, two things. One is that a signal would have to be approved by NCDOT, and that's really why I can't necessarily speak to the likelihood of that happening. And then the second part of it is that a signal usually costs the city at least $120,000, and maybe a little bit more depending on the complexity and the width and a few other factors. So those are both things to consider in weighing this condition. Did that answer your questions?
Yes, that's very helpful. So, the prospects, the timing are uncertain, and I understand that. Could you just confirm one thing that I think I know is that NCDOT has agreed that this location meets the warrants. so a signal would be justified. And then make sure I understand what you just said, that all the costs for the installation would be on the city, or is there some kind of sharing between NCDOT, or how does that normally work? Or how would it work here, I guess, or both?
That is a pretty good question. I think that the, excuse me, I was also just chatted that the warrants may have already been met. And so that is the major threshold that makes the traffic signal possible. I think that on an NCDOT facility, if they build them without much or any city participation, but that is dependent on the amount of funding NCDOT has for these projects, which is something that's a little bit uncertain to the city. And that this $20,000 could be applied to that would reduce NCDOT's costs, or it would reduce the city's costs if the city did it as a city-funded project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions of staff? Okay, I am going to now go to the applicant. I'm going to do 8 minutes per side. I know that we have some people here to speak who may be in opposition. So let's start with the applicant. And is there a timer? I guess I'll be the timer.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'm not sure why we would limit it to 8 minutes. I think the point
I
of
would
coming
like
to
to limit it.
committee is-
I would
Pardon?
like to limit
Pardon?
it to 8 minutes with additional questions. Okay.
Well, I'd just like to say, Mayor, part of the reason we're in committee is to get out of the rigid 8 minutes per side and have more of a participatory discussion. So,
And we will have that, Mr. Buffkin. First, what I want to do is get the presentation from the applicant. And then we will have questions, whatnot, but that will continue. Obviously, we haven't had many committee meetings, but I think that you probably do know that I am not rigid about the timing. I just want everybody to kind of have equal say, and then we will continue to have the conversation. Okay, so we will start with the applicant, please. Colin, do we have somebody here to
Oh.
speak?
Yeah, is that Jamie Schwedler, I believe? Is that
Okay.
correct? One
Yep.
second, please.
Good afternoon, Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street. Here on behalf of the applicant, I'm going to actually split my time with Mr. Graywall, who's here to address questions as well. We submitted an presentation, so before I guess we get started on the timer, can that presentation be uploaded, or do you need me to share mine?
Colin, can you share this, or does Jamie need to?
I can make Jamie a panelist. 1 second, please.
Okay.
Jamie, you should have the ability to share now.
Try. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. We spent a great deal of time at the last committee meeting on the history, and so I'll try not to go back into that and really start where we left off, which was what the conditions were as of the June 22nd committee meeting. And at that time, as Mr. Crane noted, we only had about 2 weeks before we had to finalize conditions because the hearing had already been closed when this got referred to committee. And so these were the conditions that were before you at that time. And of course, coming out of that committee meeting, we were asked to meet with the neighbors, which we did. And at that point, this is the plan that was before you, kind of showing the overall building area and where we had already added conditions to step back the building itself, reduce height, try to provide a little bit more breathing room along the Inman Park neighbors, and provide a little bit more predictability. And this is what we discussed with them with the committee at that point. We also discussed some of these at the city council meeting, which showed the neighbors' concern over the buffer areas and how we attempted to address that by including additional buffers, what those planting areas would look like, where we were able to preserve vegetation, and then our attempt at rendering what those property views might look like from the east. From that, we ended up going to an on-site meeting with the neighbors as soon as they were available and we were available, which was June 28th, which didn't leave us a lot of time to finalize conditions. We had a very productive meeting on-site, joined by several staff members, and discussed the outstanding questions and concerns, the current case conditions at that point, and what else we could add. And then from that discussion, we developed these additional conditions and submitted them to the neighbors for review, understanding that there was a very limited time frame, but wanted to be able to get any kind of feedback. And understanding at this point that, there's been a great deal of history to this case, but given the fact that we had a limited time to finalize the conditions, it was our intent to try to make this new product, this was not the case that we started with, but this new product of just senior housing fit in with the existing neighbors as best we can and respond to whichever concerns we could at that point, in addition to all the conditions we'd added so far. So what you see on your screen here is the finalized conditions, everything 1 through 7. I think Mr. Crane did a great job in summarizing, had not changed. The new condition 8 was talking about any screening associated with surface parking. So that surface parking area I showed you adjacent to the Inman Park neighbors, we added a condition that said surface parking within 150 feet of the northern parcels. Those are the Inman Park neighbors. That is also located above a retaining wall, should include a 3.5-foot opaque screen along the northern and eastern edges of the lot on top of the retaining wall. And that was in response to a concern about whether there would be light spillage or car lights you'd be able to see if there was any retaining walls in that area. Conditions 11, 12, and 13, I appreciate the discussion before and won't belabor the point, but they were trying to respond to concerns that we'd heard from the neighbors regarding existing transportation issues in the area that exists today, regardless of whether the site will be developed. But as we're coming in and trying to seek this request, trying to be a good neighbor. So one of those was upgrading the transit easement spot, and I think we had a great discussion on that. I'm happy to answer any questions there, but provide more predictability on the southern portion of the site where we understand the existing easement has some challenges and is not at the full level of improvement. Number 12 was in response to neighbors in Inman Park, again, concerned that a sewer line connection would be going through their existing buffer area or some of the existing trees there to Wysong Court. So we had our engineers confirm we could accommodate a condition that prevented that connection and maintain that tree area. And then number 13 was added in response again to those traffic and transportation issues that have been discussed throughout the case. I'd like Caroline Cheeves to address at the end of this any questions that remain on that, because I do think she looked into that intersection that was discussed just a moment ago. But the main point of this condition is that, our traffic contributes only 1% of the traffic to this intersection. But, and so fully replacing a light or completely installing a light would be well past the proportionality of what the zoning is expected to do. But we were thinking of how we could be good neighbors, and so we came up with the $20,000 letter of credit, because if you look at even just 1% of the traffic, this is multiples of what our impact actually is, well above what our impact actually is, but is a sign of good faith that we are committed to trying to minimize impacts in this area. and trying to reduce more than our fair share of what we would contribute to this intersection. So there's a great deal of history. I won't go into that unless it's helpful to the committee, but that's kind of where we were. It's where we are in terms of the final conditions. And I'd like Mr. Graywall to be able to say a few words about the process and where we are today. And then we're happy to answer any technical questions.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. Thank you. Could we have the next speaker, Colin?
Hi, everyone. This is Avi Graywall with Sing Development, 2601 Weston Parkway, Cary, North Carolina. I'm the applicant. I'm with Sing Development. And first of all, happy to be here again today. And I'd like to thank the neighbors for being able to meet with us just a few days after the last committee meeting in June and just kind of be able to respond to some of the things we had put in front of them so quickly. And it was great to meet with them in person for the second time. It's been a challenging year and a half, so we haven't had a lot of opportunities for that. So being able to meet face to face was definitely great. I think Jamie and Travis did a great job of talking through the conditions. So I don't think we need to get, I don't need to get into that anymore. But I think we've explored all the possible conditions. I think the neighbors, maybe some of them will speak today, understand what we're trying to do here on this property with building another senior living community in Raleigh. And if they don't, I'm happy to talk to them about the product and the community some more. We are meeting planning on meeting with Mrs. Brandt and her neighbors down Fillcrest sometime next month to discuss what construction staging might look like. Whenever we start construction on this project. Looking forward to a vote later on this morning and potentially next month at the city council meeting.
Thank you. Okay, next we have some neighbors who want to speak, and I'm going to start with Kevin Gard.
All right, I should be unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kevin, we can.
Sure, thank you. I'd like to thank this committee for the opportunity to talk with the developer regarding the final conditions. We're also appreciative that the city staff was present to answer questions. Their inputs were helpful and productive in clarifying several of the conditions under discussion. And I think it's important to point out that the progress in this case has been largely due to the intervention of the Raleigh Planning Commission, the Raleigh City Council, and this committee. Because 3 times the city leadership has sent this case back for further talks with the developer and the neighbors. And each time there have been significant changes and details reviewed and improvements made, and we're thankful. The newest detail revealed after questioning at the meeting is the eastern end of the surface parking lot is going to be raised at least 20 feet above the natural grade of the land, using fill and a large 20-foot tall retaining wall around the eastern and northern edge of the lot. Raising the parking lot up 20 feet means that 1/3 to 1/2 of the parking lot will be above the natural grade and exposed to the residents' backyards in Emmon Park. We weren't aware of this until we had direct questioning about how the developer was going to handle the 40-foot drop in elevation from Lead Mine Road to the back of the lot. So this was brand new information to us. We had to scramble to make sure that the conditions provided at least some coverage for this new information, and some coverage was included. But after sharing this information with neighbors, other questions came up about how we might be able to obscure the retaining wall from the bottom up, because there are several retaining walls in the city, and trees do not cover them up at a range of 30 foot to 100 feet, which the neighbors would be exposed to. So that was new information we had to deal with. On the issue of the traffic, we're also very appreciative of the donation or contribution towards having a light in Emmon Park and Sugar Bush. But I think it's important to point out that doesn't necessarily solve the problem of traffic that we've been discussing in this case, which is safe left-hand turns egress from the property onto Lead Mine Road. we're hopeful that a light in conjunction at North Hills Drive would be somehow helpful to DOT or the city transportation in coordinating the lights so that safe left-hand turns could be made, but it doesn't directly address that. So we feel like that issue is still open, and getting safe pedestrian access to the bus stop across the street still an open, for the inbound bus, is still an open issue. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next we have Prior Gibson.
Prior, you should be able to unmute now.
Oh, okay. Am I unmuted now?
You are.
Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, thank you again for this committee work. But for your effort and council's effort, we would not have had the opportunity to have these constructive talks with the applicant. And let me reiterate, if we haven't already, we know that Sing Development is a quality applicant, have a great product, good community citizens, and we have a need for what they're providing. That said, I think Kevin said it very distinctly. We didn't know, Madam Mayor, until we actually pointed to the map and asked direct questions that this site development was going to go 20 feet above natural grade. Then the building on top of that, and after a year and a half of us working on this pretty diligently, and we think relatively constructively and openly, we still don't have an elevation or a perspective view of what this property is going to look like from hundreds of folks' backyard. And now that we know what the elevation, the infill elevation is, and the height that the building's going to be, it's almost shocking what the landscape and the perspective is going to be from a half a mile away. It's that dramatic. I'd urge council, and especially this committee that's charged with trying to keep everybody in a conversation, to look at a perspective of what this building's going to do. And while it is an amazing group and an amazing product, this is putting an institutional gallon of water in a quart-sized residential jug. And I won't speak any longer because other folks want to speak, but no one on the residential side, no one in these neighborhoods have said anything other than we need to be responsible and reasonable. I think doubling the density would be accepted, maybe even quadrupling the zoning might be acceptable for some. But putting something this size and this small of a space is going to be so detrimental to the neighborhoods. You have to see it in a drawing, Madam Mayor, to believe it. Words can't describe this landscaping disaster that this project's going to be. Thank you for listening to us and for this opportunity. And this community, our neighborhoods will stay at the table to get this resolved as long as you allow us to. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is April Gross.
All right, thank you so much, Mayor Baldwin, committee staff. I really appreciate the opportunity again to come to the table. As you heard from Kevin and you heard from Prior, the building height and the impact on the homes around it was only discovered in our last meeting, where we found out about the enormous amount of infill and the retaining wall that was planned for the site. And it really left the impact on me was I felt that we were at a distinct disadvantage in really talking about the conditions and negotiating on what would actually work for our neighborhood. We've really worked in good faith to try to find a solution in something that initially didn't seem like it would work. But when we found that out at the last minute, it was really hard to conceptualize. And I personally walked away from it wondering if we were in a worse place than when we began. Although, again, I really do appreciate everyone's efforts and the opportunity. I really do feel like raising this building up an additional 20 feet or possibly more could have a tremendous impact to the area, which is surrounded on 3 sides with single family homes. I would also reiterate the safety impact. It's extremely dangerous to make a left-hand turn onto Lead Mine Road. Your city staff can support that. We've had catastrophic accidents. And although there is a 1% impact on traffic, I will say 80% of the traffic coming from this facility will be left-hand turns, which is why the growth center is located on the opposite side of Lead Mine Road, where it will be a right-hand turn to go to Lead Mine, to Glenwood. You can see there's no planned improvements, no traffic light plans, no plans for improving the intersection with Glenwood and Lead Mine. We really are in a dangerous situation with our families. Leaving our neighborhood, it's our only option with our children in the car. It's scary every day. So I would just ask you to please keep that in consideration. And then most importantly, I would also support that our neighborhoods encourage growth and density, but we don't feel that necessarily this is the right set of conditions that would support it in a healthy community way. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Angie Brandt.
Angie, you should be able to unmute now.
Sorry. Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, Angie.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for having us. I won't take long. I just wanted to reiterate a little bit of what's already been said. Prior mentioned that we've been working on this a long time. It's been 10 months, but it does feel like a year and a half has gone by. We're going to be talking construction impacts with Mr. Graywall in sometime in the next few weeks. But while we look forward to doing that, I feel like it's putting the cart before the horse because as April has said, we don't have any conditions to rectify some of our traffic issues. We don't have any conditions at all for Fieldcrest. Last time we met, you all said you would look into annexing Fieldcrest Drive, and I do have a question that I would ask you to answer when I'm done being able to speak, which is where we are at with that, what the outcome has been from your side in looking into that annexation option so that we can get Fieldcrest up to date and make it safe and passable for our citizens. Staff has indicated that these conditions are worrisome, and I will not put words in anybody's mouth, but they did experience this for themselves the last time they came out. I want to reiterate again for all to just really hear and understand we mean this. We are really looking for a constructive approach to this area. We want it to be workable. We want it to be safer. We want it to be a good solution for everybody who lives and commutes in this area and provide denser housing than it presently does. We understand that's going to happen and we want it to happen. We want it to be safe and we want it to be smart. We also are very eager to talk the next committee meeting about the problems with this project, the ones that brought us to this committee to begin with. So looking forward to having robust discussion to improve the process for future development, which will also impact not just our neighborhood, but all of Raleigh. So I'll defer the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I've added time so the neighbors could speak. So Janine Perry is also on the line. Could we have Janine connected, Colin?
Janine, you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate Angie's comments as I live in her neighborhood as well as the other committee members prior and Kevin and April. I've been involved in this negotiation process and it's been very difficult. I know that Parker Poe make it sound like it's been great, but I felt like they haven't been listening to me personally. I also get frustrated because when the Planning Commission did vote on this, the 3 people that voted against this project were the only people on that committee that came and walked the site and recognized that it was not the right property for such a large project. And I know that members of the city council have come out, and Mayor, I know you've been invited many times, and I would ask once again that you come out and look at this property. It is not part of the city growth center. It's to the east of the city growth center. And it should not be treated like it's part of the city growth center. It is part of smaller communities, neighborhoods, and going from 5 houses on that property to 180 units is just too big of a growth for this. I mean, as Angie said, we're pro-growth. We want to have something in this property, but we want it to be something that is appropriate and what we need in this area. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to, I have a question. I'm sure you all have the same question. I'd like to go back to the applicant and ask about the eastern end, and what is the story there?
Yes, this is Jamie Schwather. I'm going to try to share my screen again with the rendering that we had distributed in May, and this was before the additional conditions. Yeah. Can you see that on the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is the retaining wall that we're talking about here, and we tried to explain at the on-site meeting that it won't be a continuous 20 feet above grade because the property actually slopes from here downward and then from here downward. So I'd like Todd Rankine to kind of give, who's with Sing Development and looking at some of these aspects to kind of describe it. But the general sense is that there's going to be a portion where this parking lot is at a lower elevation, and there's going to be cut here and then fill here. So it's not a sense that we're just filling everything at 20 feet above the elevation right here, and then the building would be on top of that. And Todd, I know we've looked at some of these things. I might be able to speak to it more generally. But just to, I guess, to remind folks where we are, when we started this process, it was a very different project. It was much more dense. It had more height. It had more units. And the changes that we're talking about now are further iterations responding to the neighbors' concerns. And I understand they still have concerns. I'm not trying to say that it's all solved, but the changes you see are a result of that process. So a lot of what we're sharing, it's not as if it's been designed and sitting on a shelf for a year. It's constantly being conceptualized and evolving as we're listening to these. So that's going to naturally mean that some of these details are things that we are working through. It doesn't mean that we're trying to hide the ball or anything, but I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. And I know there might be differences of opinion on that, but that is why some of those details are coming as a result of these new changed conditions and the addition of the surface parking lot. Todd, can you address with any more detail what we're seeing on the screen in terms of the height of the wall, of what we think it could be?
What we think it might be.
Yeah.
I don't know if Todd Rankine is able to be.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is Todd Rankine with Sing Development. What I can expand on what Jamie was saying, and she did a good job, but just to build on that a little bit, when there was a request to push the building back further to the 150-foot spot from the northern property line, what that did is it demanded the parking go within that northern space. And so what you're seeing there is the parking that we needed to accommodate for the building. So when we laid this out, in the way the grades dropped from lead mine to the east, and to meet barrier-free and all of the accessible slopes for the paving and parking areas across there, it does need to be relatively flat, but we did slope the parking area from west going down to the east, but you can only make that so steep. Unfortunately, the grade is steeper than what the paving can be. So it's actually a cut situation on the west side where the grades along the northern property line are higher than the paving. But as the grades continue to drop, but the paving is relatively flat.
Well, the thing is, we got to do this to make it work.
Yeah.
I don't care how it affects you.
And so in between the middle island in the middle of the parking area and the island to the east or north, or I shouldn't say north, from the middle to the east or planned up, right around there at the property line, that's where we transition from us having a cut situation and being lower than grade to then being higher than grade. So it's really at that northeast corner and southeast corner of the parking that we get into about 16 to 18 feet difference. You know, we were rounding up to be a little safe, saying 20 feet. So it's really just along that area where Jamie is pointing to right now that we are about 18 feet.
I appreciate that.
I would appreciate it if everybody could mute so we can hear. We're getting a lot of background conversation. Thank you. If you could finish.
I was finished. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to respond.
Okay, I'm going to ask that we take down the presentation so I can see our committee members. Okay, does anybody have any questions related to that or any other issues? Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. So Ms. Brandt raised a question that I was going to ask. Maybe I should have asked us when we were having the staff presentation, but Mr. Raleigh forwarded me some information about annexation and the city's ability or authority to improve Fillcrest Drive. Could you share that with the committee?
Yes, be happy to, Councilmember Buckland, and good afternoon, Mayor and other members of the committee. So staff did investigate the question of improvements along Fieldcrest Drive and has done some additional research on that question. My understanding is that it is currently outside of city limits and is an NCDOT maintained street. So given that situation, the first step towards city acceptance would obviously have to be annexation, which the developer of this site is proposing to do. And so we wouldn't take over maintenance or attempt to take over maintenance from NCDOT until that takes place. The next step would involve the road and improving it to meet current city minimum standards for roads prior to that acceptance. If we got to that point, obviously I said it does not meet current city standards. So if it were to be annexed, if we were taking over maintenance for NCDOT, have to be brought to that standard by either the developer or would potentially go through the street. My understanding was the street petition process, which is similar to the process that is undertaken in evaluating things like resurfacings or other improvements, adding sidewalks, curbing gutter, things like that. So that is in response to the question of annexation and potentially improving this road. That's the response.
I have a follow-up question related to that. So for annexation, there's I would take it to mean that there's no water and like it's well water here and not connected to water and sewer. Is that correct?
Mayor, I am not certain about the answer to that specific question. I'm not sure if anyone on the call is in position to be able to respond to that. I'm not sure if we did that level of analysis. I think it was focused purely on the condition of the road and not any other types of infrastructure that may or may not be in place. But if there is anyone from planning development or otherwise that happens to be able to speak to that, please do chime in.
Okay, my other question then relates to this being outside the city limits. That also means that people who live in this area do not pay city taxes. So what would the process be of involving the community in actually saying this is what we want.
As far as
Change their tax status.
yes, and this is another technical question that I'd have to defer to planning development staff likely to be able to answer. I'm not familiar with seeing where we're getting shots.
Sure, and I'm happy to jump in here. So
Yeah.
The issue related to Fieldcrest is somewhat tangled in that Assistant City Manager Raleigh was correct. Fieldcrest is an NCDOT street, which means it's maintained by the state. It is not contained within the city limits of the city of Raleigh, nor are the parcels that are located on Fieldcrest. So state statutes really dictate how we can annex property into the city of Raleigh, into any city, honestly. And the state statutes were amended a number of years ago to prevent proactive annexation on the city's part. So we used to have a fairly robust program where the city would, throughout the year, forcibly annex properties and bring them into the city limits. That was changed back in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, and we were prohibited from doing that. So now annexations can only occur when property owners come forward and request annexation. As I understand it, that also applies to street right-of-way. And I would defer to Jason Myers. I know he's on the call here. But I don't believe that we have the ability to forcibly annex street rights-of-way in the same way that we can't forcibly annex private property. But I would defer to Jason on that question. So to kind of wrap a bow around the question, if property owners on Fieldcrest or anywhere within the area wanted to annex into the city, there's a petition process, an application process where they would come forward and ask. City staff would process the application, and that would be sent to the city council for ultimate approval of the annexation. So it's not something, again, that we can forcibly do by our hand. We have to accept the application.
This is Jason Myers with the Department of Transportation. My understanding is that state law prohibits us from annexing right-of-way itself, so that if the parcel across the street were also a part of the city limits, assuming this development is annexed as a part of the development, then the short section of Fieldcrest between those two parcels would become within the city limits, and then we could accept the street for maintenance. But the rest of the neighborhood couldn't be annexed. The Fieldcrest and the other NCDOT streets within it could not be annexed without the surrounding neighborhood petitioning for annexation themselves.
Okay, Councilmember Fort.
Yes, I see the city attorney nodding her head. I didn't know she had anything that she wanted to add to this part of the conversation.
No, I'm just, they're correct. We can't involuntarily annex really anything. So they would both have to be voluntary, and exactly what they've said is correct.
Okay, so this would have to be pursued by the property owners is the answer. So I think Angie Brandt had asked that question about where we were. I don't know if Angie is still on the line, but it would be helpful to know that she has heard this information. And I apologize, we're virtual. It makes it a little more challenging to have these conversations versus being in person. But Angie, if you could just confirm that you have heard this. Colin?
Angie, you should be able to unmute again.
Yes, thank you. I did hear this and I appreciate that. When we had our meeting back on June, I think 28th, with Parker Poe and Singh, we did ask if they would be willing to talk with the property owner on Fieldcrest. Mr. Curran, he owns 4 of the 7 parcels that are part of the Z5320 lot, as well as the entirety of the rest of Fieldcrest on that northern side. They have a relationship with him. He's offered, for us all to come and meet on his property to talk about this case. He's kind of isolated himself in some situations with my neighbors going back decades because he's been pursuing this. So we felt strongly that we could ask him to voluntarily annex or at least petition and apply. But the reality is he may not take that from us as well as he would potentially from Parker Poe and Singh. But that was back in June, and I tried to be really clear and honest about where we're at with them and why we would ask the developer to try to help us get this annexation going. And I don't know if they pursued that or not. But I'm willing to, on behalf of my neighbors, pursue that. But I'm one person who doesn't really have a history with him as or a relationship like the developer does.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. This is from April Gross. She would like to clarify that the trees shown are not on the property of Singh. And April, if you're there, if you could clarify what that question, like be more specific with that question. I would guess it's a question related that the applicant has to address.
Yes. So in the last slide shown in the presentation, and the concern with the retaining wall, and the question at the end is, are we in a better position? Where the retaining wall is highest, where they just clarified in the northeast corner, there is a view from my home, which is actually 4 homes removed from the site. And there are a lot of trees blocking the view, which looks nice, but those trees are not on the property in question that are contained in that view from my home. Those trees are owned by another property owner. So I just wanted to clarify that. Also in another presentation, Parker Poe insinuated that our properties have a lot of trees on them. And while that's true for one property that has a double width property, most properties do not have many trees on them. So it's a beautiful representation, but those trees are not conditioned to remain there.
Okay, could we have a response from the applicant on that question?
Sure. The rendering we tried to provide was more clarity of what we believe the screening could look like with the commitments that we have offered. So Ms. Gross is correct. The rendering does show trees that are on the adjacent property owner's lot. And he has spoken before in the public hearing that he intends to stay there and live out his days there. So we thought it would be accurate to show not only the trees that we are maintaining in our proposed buffer as reflected in our conditions, but also what we believe would be an accurate view given that existing significant canopy that exists on the neighboring property owner that would be between what a backyard view would see and what we would propose. Of course, renderings are estimations and they're not perfect, but it was our best attempt to try to provide some visuals that we believe were reflecting what we were offering.
Okay, April, does that address your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for fair balance that the view of the retaining wall was not necessarily an accurate representation of what it could look like in the future, although it may look like that today.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? So that City Council or anybody who is on the call. So Kevin, Pryor, April, Angie, Janine, any additional questions for the applicant? Any additional?
I'm sorry. I was raising my hand. I realized I'm not on screen. I would like to know if they did reach out to Mr. and Mrs. Curran to see if they would voluntarily annex in follow up to our meeting on June 28th.
I'm going to have Mr. Graywall respond to that because they have the relationship with the property owner. I know that that property owner does intend, that's the same property we're talking about, that intends to stay there and live there. So I know that he does not own all of the property that in question, just a portion of it. Mr. Graywall?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of had these chats with Mr. Curran in the past. He does intend to stay there and keep the property the way it is. Not does not want to be annexed into Raleigh. But like I said, even if he did, or like Jamie mentioned, there's other properties on the other side of Hillcrest that would need to be annexed into Raleigh as well. And in April, I think, or Angie, when we met, I think a lot of the concerns seemed to be from, you know, construction traffic potential. I mean, there's concerns past that, but you know, what we felt we could control was how construction traffic moves through Hillcrest or doesn't move through Hillcrest when we're actively under construction, which is why we'd like to meet with you and your neighbors on how to address that when we get to that point. Other than that, I mean, I think, you know, we've done our best to try to control what we can control with the sites that we have under contract.
Okay. Do any council members have additional questions? I saw Council Member Buffkin raise his hand.
Thank you, Mayor. So I need to go back to this annexation issue, make sure I understand exactly what's happening in connection with this rezoning. So maybe staff could confirm what I think I heard is, as far as this rezoning goes, the city would not take on any right-of-way authority on Hillcrest Drive, and the only portion of Hillcrest Drive that would be improved in connection with this would be the part immediately adjacent to the site of the rezoning on the north side of Hillcrest, and nothing else, because the parcel on the south part is not in the city, and parcels to the east, further down Hillcrest, are not in the city. Do I have that right?
This is Jason Myers of the City of Raleigh's Department of Transportation. Yeah, their obligation under a Tier 3 site plan or a subdivision of the Z53 site is to make their frontage improvements along the existing right-of-way. That obligation does not extend to any of the other sections. I think technically they could make improvements as permitted by NCDOT in the rest of that right-of-way, but they would not be obligated to, and the city would have no ability to leverage them or require them to do so. And I think the annexation is a separate issue to the street improvements under the UDO.
Okay, fair enough. So on that annexation issue, I've been told that other cities in the state, and I think Durham was the one that was named, has some authority to close these little gaps inside the city. Can staff provide any information or background on that? Does Durham have something that Raleigh doesn't?
Yeah, Councilmember, this is Pat Young. I'll speak to that because I was formerly there when we got that authority. That was a special local bill that gave the city of Durham authority to involuntarily annex what they're called donut holes, basically areas of right-of-way and property that were completely surrounded by the city. So we would need to seek special legislation if we were going to get that authority. I'll obviously defer to the attorney for any further comment.
Yeah, I would add to that. Actually, what they did was the legislature annexed it for Durham. So they gave them no authority. They just had a list of properties and said these are now in Durham to close the donut holes, which is something that could be requested by the city of Raleigh.
When did the General Assembly pass that act for Durham?
And a couple of years ago, Pat.
It was about 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's not too long ago. I mean, I have it not right in front of me, but some other council members have asked about how that might be done.
Thank you.
Okay, that could be a separate issue. We could look at separate from this. If there are donut holes around the city and we do want to ask for some legislative approval, I think that's something we could bring up and make a recommendation to the full council if that's something that this committee feels we should do. But that's a separate issue from the case that we're currently looking at. Okay. So do we have any additional questions of staff?
Madam Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes,
This,
can you identify?
yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. This is Prior Gibson. If I may, a quick question to the applicant, and I hope it's not out of bounds. Would it be possible for us to, for the council and for this committee to see a representation of what they're actually planning to build in perspective, a plan view? I mean, excuse me, we've seen the plan views, but we've never seen an elevation. And I think showing the infill and the height of the building and putting in a perspective would add a lot of value to these conversations, and certainly will help us on our side to explain it to the neighborhood folks going forward. Thank you.
Travis, I'm going to ask you to respond to that. Is that something that happens normally at other stages of development, or what's our experience with that?
Yes, ma'am. So typically building elevations are required at site plan review stage. However, there is an ability for the city council or planning commission to request renderings at this stage during the rezoning stage. It's difficult to do so only because they're not binding drawings at that point. They're illustrative only. And so it's just a representation of what might be built on the site. And the only real way to have very solid information about elevations is either through zoning conditions or through a plan development, where elevations are a part of the submittal.
Okay, and at this point, we have hit the deadline for submitting conditions.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. The deadline for conditions was on July 1st.
Okay. Councilmember Cox?
In my view, the primary issue with this rezoning is the size and massing of the building that's being proposed. I'm in agreement with the community. I think it's too large and too massive for this location. I think it is appropriate for across the street in the growth center. I think this location would be fine as a transitional area, but this is not a transition that's being proposed. It's what is really should be in the growth center, and so I'm at the point where I'm not in favor of this rezoning. I would hope that maybe the applicant can come back with another zoning request for something that is transitional to the neighborhood. And so that's where I'm at on this today. Thank you.
Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Cox. I'm not sure that I'm ready to get to the merits of the final, recommendation this committee might make. I think this has been good conversation. It's appropriate to talk about conditions while we got time to talk about them. And I'm glad everybody had a chance to talk. In my view, the committee's work isn't quite done here. I think we were here kind of clear the air about the process and to satisfy ourselves that we got all the facts on the table. And I'm not sure we've quite done that yet. And I think that work is important. It might inform future policy changes. It might result in process changes. And the bottom line is that it promotes confidence and integrity in our zoning process. I think we can do that work over the next couple months. It depends on how much agenda time we want to devote to it here. But I think we could easily come up with a schedule, for the next 2 or 3 months about the topics of discussion. And so everybody has a chance to prepare and knows what we're going to be talking about. And that's how I would recommend we proceed.
Councilmember Buffkin, no additional conditions can be added.
Yes, I understand that. And
So
like I said, we're here for
stalemate.
Well, right. Like I said, we're here for other reasons as well. And I think that's important work, and we should finish that work before we take any action on the case.
I am going to, the applicant indicated on chat that she has a comment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jamie Schradler, we would just like to understand what other, I guess, things that you would like to accomplish here, Councilmember Buffkin. We've provided perspectives in the past and understand that neighbors still have concerns, but we're unable to address them through this case. And so it'd be helpful for us to understand what you're looking for this committee to tackle, I guess is the best way to say.
Yes, the zoning case was what was sent to committee. So if there's additional topics that we are going to address, that has to be approved by the council. So I don't want to conflate the two. I mean, we have a zoning case that we have to vote on. If there are additional issues such as what came out today about the NCDOT and looking at annexing some of the properties, then that's one thing. If there's additional issues, then we need to bring that back to council to get approval to speak. This case has been going on from a zoning case standpoint, and that's what we're here to address, is this specific case. And I would ask that we take a vote on where we are. Mr. Cox has said he is opposed. If we make a motion to move this out of committee and others are opposed, you can do that. But I think the time has come. We've already had these conversations. The next part of the discussion would be separate issues that are not related to the rezoning. And I'd like the city attorney to kind of perhaps provide some guidance on that.
Well, I think that someone can make a motion and a second, and whatever the majority votes on. And if there's not a majority, you got to make a decision, what the next steps are. So I think the first question is, whether you're going to recommend approval or not recommend approval. And if there's not a majority on that, then the next step, I guess we'll go on to the next steps.
Councilmember Cox?
Yes, I'm in agreement that we need to vote. I just wanted to mention that I have a hard stop at 1 o'clock.
Okay. Councilmember Buffkin?
I think it was clear that when the council approved sending this to committee, there were other issues to work on. And that work isn't done, like I said. And as far as I know, City Attorney, there's no deadline on us to make a recommendation or a decision at all, is there?
No, there's not a deadline.
Okay, well then.
Whatever the majority of the committee decides to do is what we control.
Fair enough. Then
Or there could be a vote by the council as well. So Councilmember Buffkin, go.
I make a motion that this case be held over to our September meeting.
I'll second this motion.
All in favor? Opposed?
I'm going to vote with Mr. Buffkin on this. It's a very hard decision to make, but I'm willing to grant him 1 more month. But I think next month we really have to vote this out of committee.
Okay. The motion is approved 3-1.
Excuse me, this is Avi Graywall with Sing Development. I just like to repeat what the question that Jamie asked Councilmember Buffkin. Like, what can you, Councilmember Buffkin, can you be specific on what else you're looking for us to accomplish in the next month? Because I think it's, we try to make it very clear to the neighbors at the last meeting. I think we've done as much as we can. I know there was issues on communication, which is why we're at this committee now, and I think, we've been as open as possible. And so, if you can be more specific on what you want from us, maybe we can do a better job next time.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Why don't we connect offline and we'll talk before the next meeting.
That's a.
I'd really appreciate it if you were able to do it now, so we're all on the same page. Yeah.
That's a conversation for this committee, please.
I'm sorry, there was a lot of crosstalk there. What's the question?
If they are asking what other specific items you wish for them to address. And that's not a sidebar conversation. I think we're all interested in what additional issues they need to request. That's a discussion that happens before the committee. So if you have additional topics, Councilor Buffkin, if you could share that with the group, that would be most helpful.
Yeah, certainly. Although I think I've probably said enough about this case, either at council or here, and the motion speaks for itself. It was approved by council and referred to this committee. But like I said, in summary, we're here to clear the air about the process, and we're here to satisfy ourselves that we got all the facts in front of us. So, on the second point, we heard that just very lately, this understanding about the retaining wall came up. And we gain more understanding about the easement issues. We still don't have clarity on whether the property owner is willing to voluntary annexation of the properties that would bring Fillcrest within the city limits and allow for a comprehensive upgrade of that road. And then on the first question, there's been a lot of concern and consternation all along about how the process has gone. And again, this is important because it can inform our work going forward and promote integrity in our zoning process. So, questions like, should there be a site plan required for large rezoning requests would be an example of a policy change that I know the council has struggled with through the years, but I'm told that other cities do require that kind of thing. It promotes understanding and clarity and makes for a better rezoning process. There's also numerous questions from my constituents about, things that were said along the way that turned out to not be true, that maybe they changed. My assumption is everybody was working in good faith, but some questions have come up about things that were said that couldn't be done, and then later commitments were made to do those things. So I think we're served the city well to look into those things while we got the case in front of us, understand what happened, and adjust our policies and procedures going forward so that we have better zoning and we can promote more harmony in the community and deliver the projects that our city needs to make it a great 21st century city for everybody, to make sure our growth and development is happening in a reasoned and measured way, in a way that fits in, so that our public will support growth in the future. We know growth is happening to this city, and the city's got very little power to stop it. But what we can do is manage it in an appropriate way, direct growth to the right places. And this case is a great example and an opportunity for us to do that better in the future.
I guess I can understand that. This is Avi Graywell saying again. And, I can understand that you want to clean up the process for the city. I mean, obviously we haven't liked the way this process has gone as well. And like I said, in all honesty, I mean, we've tried our hardest to work with you all, and staff has been phenomenal along the way. And I think this is an unfortunate situation that, it's had to we keep kicking the can down the road this much, and it's probably not. It doesn't seem fair for us. It doesn't seem fair for the neighbors that we haven't been able to put this case to bed. And so I think for us, just to move forward, we'd like to take a vote. It seems like this case of ours, there's many cases in Raleigh that have the same type of contention, and we've been on council meetings with this case where there's been other contentious cases, and it feels like we're being cherry picked to help clean up the process for Raleigh, where we've done all we can for this specific rezoning case. And so,
Hey, I'm cutting off conversation right now. Councilmember Cox.
Yes, for the next month, I would like the applicant to consider coming back with another rezoning request for something that is smaller, less massive, and more transitional to the neighborhood. And I would be willing, if they're willing to do that, to vote in favor of waiving the two-year waiting period so that they can move forward. And I know they can't offer conditions, but they could come back with another rezoning request for something smaller. And I think council is in a position that we could waive the waiting period requirement to allow them to do that.
Could I have Travis address that, please?
Yes, ma'am. So as I mentioned, the deadline for conditions did pass on July 1st. There is a new provision in the code, which was part of one of our recent text changes, that does allow for what I'll call a reset of a case without having to go through a decision, a 2-year waiver, and then go back through Planning Commission. So it's possible that the City Council can choose to set another public hearing here and essentially start that process over, which would allow for new conditions. Certainly it's a choice that you have available to you if that's the path that you'd like to take. I would like to mention that if this case does remain in committee for the next month, what staff can do is sit down with the applicant and discuss potential path forward here. If they have an opportunity to provide a little bit more information that would gain a little bit more comfort with the committee members, we'd be happy to work with them to do so.
Thank you, Travis.
Travis, sorry, Mayor, this is Pat. Travis, would that have to go back to the Planning Commission if council decided to rehear the case for new conditions?
It's not a requirement, but it's not allowed.
And Travis, doesn't it have to be a less restrictive zoning district? Or
So that is the language, I believe, that's in the ordinance, is that if there's a desire to have a less restrictive condition, that it can be referred either back to the Planning Commission or another public hearing can be held by the City Council.
yeah, and the applicant would pay for the new publication for the public hearing, but less restrictive conditions or less restrictive zoning district.
Okay, and that is the applicant's choice. Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, I hear what Mr. Crane is saying, but I also believe that the applicant could refile the rezoning, and we could waive the 2-year waiting period as well, which could lead to something much better outcome for the community.
Okay. I have to say I'm disappointed we could not move forward with this one way or another. I think this is unfair to the neighbors and the applicant to keep holding this in committee. At some point, we need a decision made. So with that, we will continue to hold this in committee. That's what 3 committee members voted on. I have one person in the chat saying she has a comment. Angie, very quickly, please.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that as a member of the community, after 10 months of this has been intensive. I'm an average citizen. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a developer. I am a stay-at-home mom. This has been a lot. So pushing this off another month is not a problem for me. After 10 months of this, I would like to see us get to why we were put to committee to begin with. So I am speaking on behalf of my neighbors, and rushing this through this month is not a problem for us. Pushing it off to next month and talking again is a much better solution for us. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, Colin, how Angie appeared on the screen, because this would be a lot more helpful going forward to be able to see people's faces when they're talking to the committee. So I'll just throw that out there.
I would just like to apologize for my appearance and my office's appearance. Had I known I was on film, I would have bring myself in a little bit, maybe, put my hair up. So sorry. Thank you for your time today, everybody, really, truly. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All we needed now was the barking dog or the crying baby, and it would have been perfect COVID moment. So anyhow, all right, thank you, everybody. I am going to adjourn this meeting, and we will be back in September. Thank you.